COVID has made us experience the true value of biotech. A whole new generation of vaccines have been introduced with light-breaking speed. Biotech is also expected to grow with 9.5% kind of in the next 5 years to come. So it holds a great promise for us, for humanity. On the other hand, biotech incurs great risks. It has long lead times. It requires strict oversight. So what will COVID do for our healthcare system? It's my great pleasure to introduce the esteemed speakers to you tonight, and today and tomorrow. First of all, we have Professor Bob Langer. In the biotech world, everybody knows Bob, Method Institute of Technology, and the co-founder of Moderna Therapeutics. And with over, I'm going to read the number, 320,000 more citations, I think he's at the top of what we have. Bob, excellent to have you here. Thank you very much. Also, we have Professor Almutairi, scholar, scientist, entrepreneur. She's a professor at the Pharmaceutical Chemistry of the University of California, director of the Center for Excellence of Nanomedicine and Engineering. And we're very pleased to have you, Professor Almutairi. Next, we have Dr. Jin Lee. He's the CEO of HitGen. And HitGen is a company who has a library of molecules which will help, and he will explain later, of 1 trillion molecules to help us accelerate and improve the world. And last, but certainly not least, we have Alex Denner. For 20 years, he has been an investor in the biotech world with a great track record. And he has been the activist, basically, in the world, kind of accelerating its development. Now, Bob, if I can start with you. We're witnessing kind of like the power of the new vaccine platform. Moderna, everybody knows Moderna these days. Now, what other technologies do you see and which hold a great promise going further?
Certainly. Well, I'm very excited about messenger RNA, as you mentioned, and I'm also excited about other types of things like gene editing and I'd say cell therapy and nanotechnology. In particular, though, I think one of the areas that's really been underserved is nutrition. You know, there's so many things that nutrition can help us on with the immune system and just living longer. And, you know, at MIT, we've actually developed new ways of taking nutrients and making sure, like probiotics and others, and making sure that when they're put into foods that you get pretty much 100% out, and you can even deliver them to the right parts of the gut and so forth. So we actually even started a company called VitaKey that's collaborating with cows to really, I hope, do for nutrition what Moderna's done for vaccines. And so I think there's a number of areas like this that are very exciting. But the last thing I guess I'd mention, what I've always watched, you know, is that, you know, the future, you just sometimes don't even know. Like if you asked about CRISPR, for example, 10 years ago, nobody would have known what you meant. And I think that, you know, we always want to keep an open mind for what kinds of discoveries from basic science in university labs and other places can change the world. And those don't have a name yet because they haven't even happened.
Exactly, there is still a great future out. What would that mean for the investors? We're talking to the investment community here. So what would that mean? What would that entail?
Well, I think, you know, to me, investors, I think, want to invest in cutting edge areas that can make a difference and really that have been underserved. That's why I mentioned nutrition. I think that nobody's done anything very novel in that for a long time. And obviously, the reason Moderna did very well is because of great science. I think great science is always key. Great science coupled with really great business people. But one of the reasons, again, Moderna did so well is they've had great investors and actually a great CEO in Stéphane Bancel. So I think it's a combination of all those things.
Thank you, Bob. It is a combination of getting the company and the science together. But perhaps there's even more if you think about in a global healthcare system what we really need. Professor Almutairi, what would we need more in a good performing healthcare system?
Well, I think what's important and what has been really highlighted during this pandemic is better investment in the healthcare sector and research and development in the healthcare sector. by both federal or government, public investment, and also private investment. And it's been stagnant for a while in the United States, and many other developing countries really need to catch up on their spending on R&D, research and development, both in mission-driven public sector spending, for example, in basic research. One area that should be heavily invested in by governments, I think, is in immunology, when we're talking specifically about healthcare. And that has reaped many benefits over the last 10 years, like Professor Langer was telling us. CRISPR technology, gene editing technology, was born out of study of the immune system of bacteria, and that won the Nobel Prize for this past year, 2020. And in 2018, another immunology basic research finding also got the Nobel Prize in immunotherapy. So I think this pandemic has taught us that the immune system is complex. Studying it has benefits that far outreach our vision of what it could be. And we, over the decades, it's proven that you invest in understanding the immune system, then you can have better healthcare technologies. And that really lays on the shoulders of governments, I think. In terms of private sector investment, I think that we definitely need to, the private sector needs to invest more in drug delivery. And one of the successes, the reasons behind the success of RNA technology is twofold. One, it's an old technology, however, the delivery vehicles were a recent breakthrough, and coupled with amplification methods like self-replicating mRNA. That really enabled this to happen. And the third component of the success of the RNA vaccine is the regulatory process. It was obvious that it needed to be sped up. And one thing that I could say, both in private investment and also in the regulatory process, is we need as people to overcome our loss aversion bias, which I think is a big challenge that, if you look at the FDA, they don't have much to lose, some of these panels, if they don't approve a new technology, but they have a lot to lose if something goes wrong. So we need to really re-examine our decision-making and overcome our natural tendencies, human beings, to get stuck in the loss aversion bias, our way of thinking.
So that would mean we would have a different perspective, and therefore perhaps also some implications on the way we approve medicine and new, basically, kind of like delivery methods to really drive innovation forward.
Correct. We want to worry less about what could go wrong, exactly. And take definitely more risks.
Thank you, thank you. Dr. Lee, we talked about new delivery and new medicine being delivered, but of course there is also a whole host of vaccines when they are developed kind of in the conventional way, where there is significant improvement to be made in development and delivery. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah. So what we have seen clearly in 2020 with the threat of the COVID vaccine has really been the hope for bringing the world into the better shape out of this pandemic case. But obviously, there are also other approaches to therapies we know as traditional chemical drugs, small molecules, antibodies, as well as cell therapies, all sorts of methods available. What we have been working on really is about getting prepared and making more molecules available as the toolboxes for the future. When we do develop therapies, we have sufficient resources to screen against different diseases. So what the HitGen has been working on is creating this massive small molecule resources. We use DNA-encoded chemical libraries. We now have reached over 1 trillion small molecule libraries ready for screening for different therapy applications. And what we have learned, suppose from this effort, is under this massive threat, and a lot of resource and effort can be focused to develop therapies and treatment in a much quicker way. than previously possible. As we all know in the pharmaceutical industry, it's a long time to develop a therapy. But what COVID has taught us, if the treatment needs are important enough for human life, society, much quicker speed and much greater resources can be applied to develop the therapy as well as prevention. So my view is we need to develop and prepare more different resources available and ready to be used in situations as well as in, if you like, challenging disease areas which are not ongoing affecting human lives.
Exactly, and with kind of the technology kind of you propose, we currently have like 10 years in the development, or a decade kind of for the development of a new vaccine in a more conventional way. We've seen that shortened. Do you think that 10 years is still acceptable, or will 1 year be the new normal?
I think obviously the COVID situation is different from what we normally face in drug development. And there are also different disease areas which require different types of assessment, in safety assessment, as well as in efficacy assessment. Clearly what this last year taught us is we should probably re-examine many areas to work on. How do we assess efficacy? How do we assess safety? And are we, just like Professor Almutairi talked about, maybe we should look at efficacy more importantly, and be able to take risks in a more manageable way, and getting therapies out into patients as quickly as possible. Our personal view is we probably can accelerate, provided there's a collaboration between the industry regulators in the interest of patients. But also we need to be scientific. Not everything can be done in a year, but there are certainly some things could be speeded up.
Thank you, thank you. There's hope for the future. Now, all of this, of course, gives rise to some of the forecasts. We see 9.5% growth in the next 5 years in the biotech sector. And that's why we're happy, Alex, to have you with us as being an investor kind of in the biotech sector with a great track record. So this must be great times for you looking forward.
It is. It's a very exciting time. I think that, biotech was exciting. The pandemic has been terrible, obviously, and it's been a catastrophe around the world. But one of the silver linings that has come from it is that it sort of re-energized a lot of things that are happening in biotech, and reminded all of us in society how important investment in R&D is. One of the things, the investment system overall works reasonably well, but one of the things that many investors have been concerned about is there's been a lot of pressure on pricing for novel new drugs, and that type of thing is causing people to demand higher returns prospectively in R&D programs. So one of the things that we've seen, before the coronavirus was for antibiotics and antimicrobials, antivirals, the amount of people that were willing to invest in that has been actually quite small. And people were reminded of how important those areas are, and you see that the investment climate for them is better. And I think that there are a bunch of other areas like that, where, for instance, cardiovascular, metabolic disease, neuropsychiatry, those are areas that many of the larger companies in pharmaceuticals are investing much less than they have historically, because they perceive it to be a low return business, that they can't get sort of enough pricing to justify significant investments. But those are still hugely unmet areas where we need a lot of advances in those areas.
If we look at what you said, there is a lot of opportunity. Still, some of the large diseases are not kind of like being addressed. There is currently an abundance of money. but only it's the return which is hampering, because we have a current price level kind of in the market. So that begs the question, if we have all the pieces available, and innovation technically can be possible, what should we do from an investor perspective to mobilize this, to get this going?
So I think that, one has to be, in investing, one has to be looking at these things, kind of all the time. And I think that from a societal point of view, we have to all recognize, and, from a political standpoint and a societal standpoint, we have to recognize that we have to devote, a meaningful part of our national budgets to healthcare. As countries sort of realize, oh my God, healthcare costs are exploding, and they sort of try to tighten down on expenses and to limit growth, that can have a real negative effect in terms of the companies willing to invest in certain areas. So I think that investors have to be sufficiently forward-looking in those areas, and we have to, as a society, recognize the value of this so that people can feel and to see the return.
Exactly. So we need to have a different appreciation ultimately, but also the mechanism to reward for research investment earnestly. Now, a lot of the research is done by smaller biotech startup, where a lot of research is happening. How do we connect that ecosystem? Because if we look at Moderna as an example, and we see the mergers which are currently there, it's fair to say that big pharma kind of missed out a bit on the opportunity. They're late to the game, so to speak. So how do we connect this? How do we make this work?
Yes, that's a very interesting point, and I don't think that it's an accident that Moderna and BioNTech are the companies that really develop the vaccines that, along with Pfizer, that are currently the most widely approved around the world. The larger companies tend to be first, they're kind of lemmings. They do what each other do, and they tend to be reluctant to invest in newer technologies. They'll do it to kind of look cool, and they have some kind of token efforts and everything. But often many of the bigger companies, and there are exceptions, Pfizer, for instance, was one that showed that the larger companies are not able to recognize where the most value can be created and where the most promising research is. And they have to sort of partner with smaller companies and recognize a lot of the value is created there, and a lot of the best ideas come from smaller companies.
Alex, if I may, I think I agree entirely with you. And that's, again, those larger companies, the more you have, the more afraid you are of losing what you have, that loss aversion, right? And so the smaller companies have less to lose, and so can take more risks.
I think that's exactly right, and I think that the smaller companies also are generally more innovative, just independent of whether they feel the risk tolerance or not.
Exactly. But perhaps we have 50 seconds left. Bob, if I can kind of refer to you, what's your view of kind of connecting the ecosystem of the early inventions with your kind of experience to business life? You're one of the entrepreneurs, you have done it. What would be the magic formula? We have 30 seconds left, I'm afraid.
Well, I think the magic formula is what we've done, whether it's Moderna or Momenta or other companies. It's basically, making really cutting edge inventions and trying to, develop them first in the academic lab and get a proof of principle, and then starting companies with, really good investors. That's what I hope we'll do over and over again. It's what we're going to hopefully do in nutrition and so forth. So that's what I think.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, all. I hope we have been able to kind of convey a compelling case to you as biotech as really deserving his neo-renaissance. Thank you very much, all panel.